My family actually demanded my $100,000 life savings to buy a luxury condo for my sister. The exact same sister who abandoned her twin toddlers for a flashy lifestyle. I was 8 months pregnant, sitting across the dinner table, listening to them justify stealing my hard-earned money. I did not scream. I did not cry or beg them to be reasonable. I just took a slow breath, looked my father dead in the eye and said, "Fine. You can have it on one condition." When I laid out that condition, every smug smile in that room died. They had absolutely no idea I already owned the very estate they were sitting in. My name is Nora. I am 31 years old, a senior data analyst, and at the time of this absolute nightmare, I was exactly 8 months pregnant with my first child. My husband, Derek, is 32 and works as a highly successful wealth manager at a prestigious downtown firm. By any normal, rational standard, we are a successful, stable couple building a solid, independent future. But in my family, logic, reason, and normal standards have never once applied to me. I was born into a family that valued perception over reality, and I was the one child who refused to play along with their exhausting game of pretend. I grew up in a towering, multi-million-dollar historic estate in a heavily gated, exclusive suburb. From the outside, the property was breathtaking. It featured sweeping mahogany front doors, perfectly manicured emerald lawns, and a grand wraparound porch. Inside, it was even more intimidating. My father, Harrison, and my mother, Sylvia, treated that house like a sacred museum dedicated exclusively to their own massive egos. Everything had to look absolutely perfect for their wealthy country club friends and their elite church associates. The antique Persian rugs had to be completely spotless. The massive crystal chandeliers in the foyer had to shine brightly enough to blind the neighbors. And their children had to fit perfectly into their carefully curated illusion of high society success. I was always the invisible daughter. I was the reliable one, the boring one, the daughter who actually read books instead of fashion magazines. I was the one who worked double shifts at a local diner throughout high school to save up for my own college tuition while living under their massive, expensive roof. They refused to pay for my education because they claimed it would build character. Yet, I vividly remember being 19 years old, sitting in our grand kitchen and draining my entire summer savings account just to pay for a massive emergency roof repair on that very historic estate. My father had temporarily overextended his credit on a luxury imported sports car he absolutely did not need, and the contractors were threatening to place a lien on the house. Did I get a thank you? No. I was told by my mother that it was simply my inherent duty to contribute to the preservation of the family legacy. While I was paying for roof shingles out of my minimum wage tips, my younger sister Paige was being handed the entire world on a silver platter. Paige is 28 years old now, and she has spent her entire life being the undisputed, untouchable golden child. She possesses my mother's exact features. She is the pretty one, the charming one, the one who inherently knows exactly how to manipulate our parents' deep, pathetic obsession with social appearances. Paige's failures, and there were many of them, were always framed by my parents as temporary setbacks or the fault of jealous outsiders. Meanwhile, my actual, hard-earned successes were treated as the bare minimum expectation. That Thanksgiving, the stark contrast between how we were treated was absolutely sickening. Derek and I arrived early at the estate to help with the massive holiday dinner. My lower back was throbbing with a dull, relentless ache, and my ankles were painfully swollen under the heavy, exhausting weight of an 8-month pregnancy. But there I was, standing in the suffocating heat of their massive gourmet kitchen, peeling 5 pounds of potatoes and constantly basting a massive turkey. My mother, Sylvia, completely ignored me. She did not ask how my pregnancy was progressing. She did not offer me a glass of water or a chair to rest my aching feet. She was entirely consumed by the task of meticulously polishing the silver gravy boat and arranging extravagant floral centerpieces for Paige's grand arrival. I was carrying her very first granddaughter, but all my mother cared about was making sure the formal dining room looked like a glossy spread in an architectural magazine, so the golden child would feel appropriately celebrated. It was an isolating, bitter feeling, standing in that hot kitchen, realizing that no matter what I achieved or how much I helped, I would only ever be the hired help in my own family's home. The most heartbreaking part of this entire twisted family dynamic was not how they constantly belittled and ignored me. I was an adult, I had Derek, and I had learned how to build emotional walls to protect myself. The true tragedy was how they treated Mason and Finn. They are Paige's 3-year-old twin boys, and they are the innocent collateral damage of my family's obsession with appearances. 3 years ago, Paige abruptly decided that the exhausting reality of motherhood was getting in the way of her desperate desire to travel, attend music festivals, and live a flashy, carefree lifestyle. So, she simply dumped the boys at the estate. She left them with our parents under the guise of needing time to find herself and build her personal brand as a social media influencer. She packed 2 luxury suitcases, kissed the boys on the forehead, and practically ran out the mahogany front doors. My parents, terrified of the public scandal and the whispers that would inevitably start if anyone in their elite circle found out their golden child was actually a deadbeat mother, happily took the boys in to cover up the mess. They spun a beautiful, elaborate lie for the church community and the country club. They proudly told everyone that Paige was away on highly important international business ventures and that they were simply enjoying some quality extended time with their precious grandsons. But behind closed doors, the reality was bleak. Harrison and Sylvia had absolutely zero patience, zero energy, and zero genuine affection for 2 loud, energetic toddlers. The boys were largely confined to a designated playroom on the 2nd floor. They were treated like inconvenient, noisy props that were only brought out and dressed in matching designer outfits when guests came over, just to prove what a perfect, loving family we were. That afternoon in the kitchen, the true depth of their negligence became terrifyingly, almost fatally, clear. Mason and Finn had managed to escape the upstairs playroom and were running around the massive marble kitchen island, laughing loudly and chasing each other. The noise echoed off the high ceilings. Sylvia was immediately flustered, her face flushing with deep annoyance because the joyful sounds of her grandsons were ruining her perfect, quiet aesthetic preparation for Paige. Without looking, without even thinking for a fraction of a second, Sylvia reached into a large decorative glass jar on the counter. She pulled out a massive, thick peanut butter cookie that a neighbor had dropped off earlier that morning, and she handed it directly to Mason just to keep him quiet. My heart stopped completely. The blood drained from my face in a sickening rush. Mason has a severe, highly documented, life-threatening peanut allergy. Every single person in this family knows this. It was written in bright red marker on a massive whiteboard right next to the double-door refrigerator. I did not think. I did not calculate my steps. I just reacted with pure, terrifying maternal adrenaline. I dropped the heavy ceramic serving platter I was holding. It hit the hardwood floor with a deafening, violent crash, shattering into dozens of sharp, jagged pieces. I lunged across the kitchen island as fast as my heavy, pregnant body would physically allow. I slapped the cookie out of Mason's small hand just a fraction of a second before he could take a bite. The cookie crumbled onto the floor, mixing with the dangerous shards of broken ceramic. I fell to my knees right there on the hardwood, pulling Mason tightly against my chest. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I frantically checked his face, his lips, his breathing for any signs of an allergic reaction. He was crying, understandably startled by the loud noise and my sudden, aggressive movement. Finn ran over, his lower lip trembling, and hugged my arm. Sylvia let out a loud, dramatic, piercing gasp. But she was not looking at the terrified 3-year-old boy who almost went into full anaphylactic shock because of her sheer negligence. She was looking at the messy floor. "Nora, what on earth is wrong with you?" My mother shrieked, waving her manicured hands frantically in the air. "Look at the absolute mess you just made. That platter was a vintage European import. You are ruining the entire afternoon with your dramatic outbursts." I looked up at her from the floor, still clutching the shaking toddler to my chest. "Mom, he is severely allergic to peanuts. You just handed him a peanut butter cookie. His throat would have closed up in minutes. We would be in an ambulance right now." Sylvia rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, exasperated sigh as if I were simply overreacting to a minor inconvenience, like spilled milk. Well, I forgot. You do not have to be so hysterical and break my expensive things to make a point. Just clean it up immediately before your sister gets here. She does not need to see this kind of chaos. She turned her back on me, completely unbothered, and walked out of the kitchen to fetch a broom from the pantry. She did not comfort her sobbing grandson. She did not apologize for almost killing him. She only cared about the vintage platter and the visual presentation of her kitchen. As I knelt on that floor, holding those two abandoned, unloved boys, the very last shred of familial guilt I had ever held onto completely evaporated. The cold, hard rage inside me solidified into something entirely unbreakable. I realized in that exact moment that I owed these terrible people absolutely nothing. Paige finally arrived a full hour and a half after the holiday dinner was supposed to officially begin. She did not offer a single apology for keeping everyone waiting. She simply glided through the heavy front doors of the estate, clinging tightly to the arm of her newest boyfriend, Trent. Trent was a loud, obnoxious 30-year-old guy who aggressively referred to himself as a cryptocurrency visionary and a decentralized wealth pioneer. In reality, as Derek had quickly deduced from a 5-minute conversation, Trent was an arrogant, unemployed scam artist who wore overly tight, cheap suits drenched in suffocating designer cologne. The moment they walked into the foyer, Harrison and Sylvia practically tripped over their own feet to greet them. Harrison, who had barely given my husband Derek a dismissive head nod earlier that afternoon, vigorously shook Trent's hand with both of his own. He immediately led Trent into the formal living room and poured him a massive, generous glass of a $500 single malt whiskey. Paige, meanwhile, barely acknowledged her own flesh and blood. She gave her twin sons a quick, detached pat on the head before loudly complaining that their sticky little fingers were going to ruin her brand-new silk blouse. Derek and I took our designated seats quietly at the far end of the long, polished mahogany dining table. Throughout the entire first course, Trent completely monopolized the conversation. He waved his silver fork around, loudly declaring that traditional banking systems were dead, that fiat currency was a trap for the uneducated middle class, and that real wealth was built on digital disruption. Derek, who literally manages massive, highly complex multi-million-dollar portfolios for a living, politely tried to ask a basic, fundamental question about Trent's risk management strategies. Trent completely talked over my husband, laughing with a sickening, condescending sneer. "You just do not understand the decentralized liquidity momentum, man," Trent sneered, pointing his knife at Derek. "You traditional finance guys are dinosaurs. Paige and I are about to make some massive, unprecedented moves. We are securing a luxury downtown condo this week to serve as our primary trading headquarters and brand studio." Harrison beamed with absolute, unadulterated pride. He tapped his crystal wine glass with his silver fork to demand everyone's immediate attention. He stood up slowly at the head of the long table, puffing his chest out in his tailored suit. "Your mother and I have been talking," Harrison announced, his deep baritone voice echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings of the dining room. "We look at Paige and Trent, and we see incredible, limitless potential. We know exactly how important it is to have the right address and the right image when you are building a financial empire from the ground up. So, we have decided to give you two an early engagement gift to secure that beautiful downtown condo. Tomorrow morning, we are releasing $100,000 from the Family Emergency Joint Account to cover your down payment in full." The entire room went completely, terrifyingly still. I stopped chewing. I set my fork down slowly. I stared at my father, genuinely stunned by the sheer, breathtaking audacity of his words. The Family Emergency Joint Account was a complete and utter lie. For years ago, my parents had cornered me, begging me to open a joint savings account with my father. They claimed we desperately needed a unified safety net to protect the historic estate and to build generational wealth for the family. But over the past 4 years, I was the only person who had ever deposited a single penny into that account. Every yearly bonus I earned, every tax refund I received, every single dollar of overtime pay I fought for went straight into that account. It contained exactly $100,000 of my own, hard-earned savings. My parents had never contributed a dime. Paige had never contributed a dime. Paige let out a loud, fake gasp of delight, covering her mouth with her freshly manicured hands. Oh my God, Dad. Mom. That is so incredibly generous. I cannot believe it. Thank you so much. Trent smirked, raising his expensive whiskey glass in a triumphant toast directly to my father. I looked at Derek. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek, but he waited for my lead. I looked back at my father. My voice was perfectly even, devoid of any emotion whatsoever. No, you're not, I said. Harrison's triumphant, proud smile vanished instantly. He glared at me, his thick eyebrows pulling together in anger. Excuse me, Nora? What did you just say? You are not giving them that money, I repeated, keeping my tone deadly calm. That is my money. I am the only person who has ever funded that account. Derek and I are expecting a child in exactly 1 month. We are preparing for our own future. I am absolutely not giving my life savings to Trent, so he can play crypto trader in a luxury high-rise. Sylvia scoffed loudly, waving her hand dismissively in my direction as if I were a pest. Oh, Nora, please stop being so incredibly selfish and dramatic. You and Derek make plenty of money. Paige desperately needs a proper home to get her life on track. You need to learn how to sacrifice for the greater good of this family. I looked at the people sitting around that beautiful, expensive table. My father demanding my money. My mother calling me selfish. My sister waiting eagerly to steal my savings. And Trent, sitting there with a smug, victorious grin, fully believing he had already won the lottery. I reached for my glass of ice water. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I set the glass back down on the coaster. Fine, I said. The single word hung in the air, cold and sharp as a blade. You can have the $100,000. But on one condition. The exact moment the word fine left my mouth, the heavy, suffocating tension in the dining room evaporated into a sickening wave of arrogant relief. My father let out a booming, condescending laugh, clapping his hands together and praising me for finally seeing reason and acting like a team player. Paige immediately pulled out her phone and started talking loudly to Trent about ordering custom Italian leather furniture for the new condo. They did not even bother to ask what the condition was. They simply assumed that whatever minor hurdle I attempted to put up, they could easily step right over it with their usual bullying tactics. They thought I had simply caved to the pressure, just like I had done when I was 19 years old paying for their roof. I stood up slowly from the table, pushing my chair back. I quietly excused myself, stacking a few empty dessert plates, and walked toward the kitchen. Sylvia immediately followed me, the heavy wooden swinging door closing sharply behind us. The moment we were completely alone, her fake, cheerful holiday party demeanor dropped entirely, replaced by a mask of cold, hard irritation. The hiss of the running faucet filled the quiet space as I began rinsing the fine china. Sylvia stepped uncomfortably close to me, invading my personal space. Her voice dropped to a harsh, venomous whisper. Do not ever try to embarrass your father at the dinner table in front of guests again, Nora. You know exactly how important appearances are to him. You made us look like a fractured family in front of Trent. I kept my eyes focused firmly on the sink, scrubbing a porcelain plate with slow, deliberate, heavy motions. I am not the one who should be embarrassed right now, Mom. You are openly letting an unemployed scam artist steal your pregnant daughter's life savings. Sylvia reached out and grabbed my upper arm. Her long, freshly manicured acrylic nails dug sharply into my skin through the fabric of my maternity sweater. I stopped moving. I did not drop the plate. I slowly turned my head to look directly into her eyes. I did not pull away. I just stared at her hand, my expression completely blank, until she uncomfortably loosened her grip and dropped her hand to her side. You have always been so incredibly rigid and jealous of your sister, Sylvia hissed, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. Paige has a special light about her. People are naturally drawn to her. You are just bitter because you have to work hard for everything while things come so naturally to her. She needs this condo, Nora. She needs a proper, luxury home so she can finally take Mason and Finn back and give them the good life they deserve. You are standing in the way of those boys getting their mother back. It was a blatant, disgusting, entirely manipulative lie. Paige had absolutely no intention of taking the twins to a luxury downtown condo, and Sylvia knew it perfectly well. A luxury penthouse for a crypto bro does not include two loud toddlers. Sylvia was just weaponizing those innocent boys to manipulate my emotions and force my compliance. "You are a terrible liar, Mom," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously quiet. "Paige is never taking those boys. She does not even know their shoe sizes. You just want the church community to think she is a highly successful entrepreneur, so you do not look like a massive failure of a mother." Sylvia's face turned a deep, angry, mottled red. "We are your family. Your father gave you the name that allowed you to get your fancy education and your corporate job. You owe this family your loyalty, and you owe your sister your support." I carefully turned off the faucet. I dried my hands thoroughly on a linen towel, folding it neatly on the counter. "I owe you absolutely nothing. If you want my money for your golden child, it is going to be done entirely legally. I am not handing over $100,000 of my savings without a bulletproof liability waiver. I want a formal, legally binding contract stating that once this money leaves my account, I am completely absolved of any future financial or legal responsibility for Paige, Trent, or the preservation of this family's estate." Sylvia rolled her eyes dramatically, letting out a sharp, dismissive breath. "You are always so endlessly paranoid and dramatic. You make everything so difficult. Fine. Draw up whatever silly piece of paper makes you feel powerful and important. Your father will sign it first thing tomorrow morning, so we can finally be done with this exhausting nonsense." She turned on her heel and marched confidently back into the dining room to rejoin the celebration. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen, resting my hands on my pregnant belly, looking out the window into the dark, stormy backyard. She truly thought my demand for a contract was just the petty, emotional tantrum of a jealous sister trying to exert a tiny bit of control. She had absolutely no idea that she had just eagerly agreed to step into a legally binding trap from which there was no escape. The drive back to our own house that night was completely quiet for the first 20 minutes. The rhythmic, steady hum of the tires on the wet, rain-slicked pavement was incredibly soothing after the chaotic, suffocating toxicity of my parents' estate. Derek kept his right hand resting gently on my knee, driving with a steady, calm, deeply reassuring focus. He did not need to ask if I was okay, or if I was upset by the massive betrayal we had just witnessed. He knew exactly what was brewing in my mind, and he was already calculating the next moves. "They took the bait without even blinking," Derek said quietly, his eyes fixed firmly on the dark road ahead. "Harrison is so desperate to fund Trent's illusion of wealth that he will blindly sign absolutely anything we put in front of him tomorrow." I leaned my heavy head against the cold glass of the passenger window, watching the streetlights blur past in the rain. He thinks I am just protecting myself from future tax liabilities. He has absolutely no idea who he is actually dealing with. The beautiful, terrifying truth was that the trap had been meticulously set 6 months ago. My parents loved to project the flawless image of untouchable, generational wealth to their community, but their actual finances were a terrifying, fragile house of cards ready to collapse at any moment. About a year ago, Paige decided she wanted to launch a high-end, luxury activewear line. She had absolutely no business plan, no marketing experience, and no real work ethic, but she somehow convinced my father that it would make her a multi-millionaire within a year. To fund her massive delusion, Harrison did the unthinkable. He secretly took out a massive, high-interest secondary mortgage against the historic estate. Of course, Paige's business failed spectacularly within a few months. The inventory sat in a warehouse, the money completely vanished into expensive marketing parties, and Harrison was left holding a catastrophic amount of high-interest debt. He could not make the payments. He defaulted entirely. The bank quietly initiated foreclosure proceedings. If the foreclosure went public and they lost the house, Harrison and Sylvia would be socially and utterly ruined. They would lose their prestigious country club memberships, their elevated standing in the church, and their entire identity, which was tied entirely to that specific address. But what Harrison did not know was that Derek's wealth management firm caught wind of the distressed debt portfolio being quietly shopped around by the bank. When Derek pulled the files and told me what my father had done, I did not confront Harrison. I did not call my mother to yell at her. I certainly did not offer to bail him out with my own money. Instead, Derek and I quietly and quickly formed an anonymous, private corporate entity. We named it Revenge Echo LLC. Through Revenge Echo LLC, we used our own capital to legally purchase the distressed debt directly from the bank for pennies on the dollar. We absorbed the toxic mortgage and legally executed a deed in lieu of foreclosure. It was a completely legal, airtight, and totally confidential transaction. For the past 6 full months, Harrison and Sylvia had been living in a massive historic estate they no longer legally owned. They had not received any eviction notices yet, so they foolishly thought the bank was simply moving slowly on the foreclosure paperwork due to bureaucratic delays. They had absolutely no idea that their invisible, ungrateful, supposedly boring daughter was the actual, legal owner of their multi-million-dollar estate. I was their landlord. I held the deed to their entire legacy, and I had been quietly biding my time, waiting for the absolute perfect moment to collect exactly what was mine. And tonight, by trying to arrogantly steal my life savings to fund another one of Paige's massive financial mistakes, they had handed me the perfect execution method on a silver platter. It was well past midnight when we finally pulled into the driveway of our home. While I went to the kitchen to make myself a warm cup of decaf chamomile tea to soothe my nerves, Derek walked straight into his home office. When I finally walked in carrying my mug, the soft, glowing blue light from his dual monitors illuminated his sharp, intensely focused expression. He had already taken off his suit tie, rolled up his sleeves, and was typing rapidly on his mechanical keyboard. He was pulling up highly complex, standard legal templates and modifying them with ruthless, surgical precision. I pulled up a comfortable leather chair right beside him, wrapping my cold hands around the warm ceramic mug. "Walk me through the kill shot," I said softly, watching the dense blocks of text form on the bright screen. Derek smiled, a dark, brilliant smile, as his eyes scanned the legal jargon. "It is fundamentally a mutual separation of assets and liability release," Derek explained, his voice low and steady. "We are going to heavily dress it up as a defensive document. We will tell Harrison it is strictly designed to protect you from any future IRS audits or any legal fallout if Trent inevitably loses the $100,000 in an unregulated crypto scam. Harrison's massive, blinding ego will make him completely dismiss the document as just your typical, annoying corporate paranoia." Derek scrolled down the document and highlighted a specific, dense paragraph buried deep within the bottom of the 3rd page. "But right here is the offensive layer. This is the poison pill. I am writing a reciprocal, absolute condition for the release of the funds." I leaned in closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the highlighted text. I read it aloud slowly to ensure I understood the weight of every single word. "The receiving parties hereby waive, release, and forever discharge the providing party and any affiliated corporate entities from any and all future claims, demands, tenancy rights, or equitable rights to property or assets." I stopped reading and looked at Derek, the massive reality of the legal language fully settling over me. "Any affiliated corporate entities." "Exactly," Derek confirmed, turning in his chair to look directly at me. "Revenge Echo LLC is an affiliated corporate entity under your name. Right now, because they have lived in that house for 30 years, Harrison could theoretically drag us into court when we finally serve the eviction notice. He could claim we acted as predatory lenders. He could claim he has a deep equitable interest in the estate. He could cry to a judge that his own daughter tricked him. It would be a long, messy, highly publicized, and very expensive legal battle. Derek pointed a finger firmly at the screen. But if he signs this exact contract tomorrow morning just to get his greedy hands on your $100,000, he is legally and voluntarily surrendering any right to ever challenge our ownership of the estate. He is expressly waiving his tenancy rights. He is permanently signing away his only possible legal defense against a forced eviction. He is literally willingly trading his multi-million-dollar property for a quick cash payout to a scam artist. I stared at the blinking cursor on the bright screen. It was brilliantly, breathtakingly ruthless. It was a flawless, inescapable legal trap constructed entirely out of their own boundless greed and their arrogant, lifelong assumption that I was beneath them and incapable of outsmarting them. "Print it," I said, my voice steady and resolute. Derek pressed the print command on his keyboard. A moment later, the quiet, mechanical hum of the laser printer whirred to life in the dark corner of the office. The crisp, warm white pages slid out into the tray one by one. Every single page carried the absolute, undeniable destruction of the gilded cage I had grown up in. I stood up, walked over, and picked up the warm pages, feeling the heavy, solid weight of the paper in my hands. Tomorrow morning, my family was going to march into my house demanding my savings. They were going to eagerly and arrogantly sign their names on the dotted line, completely blind to the fact that they were executing their own devastating downfall. The trap was printed, the bait was set, and all they had to do was step inside. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us what city you are living in. Every single comment helps push the video to more listeners, and we truly appreciate your support. Stay tuned, because you will not believe what happens next. The next morning, the sun rose over our quiet suburban neighborhood, casting a sharp, golden glow across my home office. I sat perfectly still in my ergonomic chair, a stark contrast to the frantic, chaotic energy I knew was currently vibrating through my parents' historic estate. My workspace was an absolute oasis of calm. My dual monitors hummed quietly, displaying the steady flow of global market data, while a single cup of decaf chamomile tea steamed on the coaster beside my keyboard. I had deliberately muted my phone, placing it face up on the glass desk so I could watch the notifications pile up without letting the noise disrupt my peace. I knew exactly what Harrison was going to do. I knew his massive ego could not handle being told to wait, especially by the daughter he considered to be entirely beneath him. He was a man who believed that rules, banking protocols, and standard operating procedures applied to the middle class, not to him. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the dark screen of my phone lit up brightly, shattering the quiet of my office. It was not a text message from Paige or an angry phone call from my mother. It was an automated, high-priority push notification from the secure banking app tied to the family emergency joint savings account. The banner flashed in urgent red text across my screen, reading, "High-value wire transfer initiated. Immediate action required." I unlocked my phone and opened the banking portal, my eyes scanning the transaction log with clinical precision. He had actually tried to force it through. Without my signature, without the in-person meeting I had demanded, and without the legal paperwork, my father had attempted to bypass the dual authorization protocol. I clicked into the detailed audit trail, and it painted a desperate, hilarious picture. Starting at exactly 7:45 in the morning, Harrison had logged into the primary account portal and tried to initiate a direct, massive wire transfer of the full $100,000. The destination was an external account registered under Trent's name at a shady, offshore cryptocurrency exchange. The banking system automatically flagged the massive amount and paused the transaction. 10 minutes later, Harrison tried again. This time, he divided the money into two $50,000 transactions, foolishly hoping to slip beneath a perceived security threshold. The system immediately flagged both of those attempts as well. Then, according to the customer service logs attached to the account notes, my father had called the bank directly. I could perfectly picture him pacing the hardwood floors of his massive foyer, his face flushed red with indignation, shouting at some underpaid bank representative. I knew exactly the tone he used. He would have puffed up his chest, invoked his status as a long-standing premium client, and demanded they release his money immediately. But automated banking security algorithms do not care about Harrison's country club membership. The system only recognizes permissions, and my permission was explicitly withheld. A new notification popped up on my screen, replacing the first one. It read, "Transaction blocked. Secondary account holder digital signature required. Fraud prevention protocol engaged." The digital wall I had built held completely firm. The bank had locked down the transfer, requiring me to physically log in, authenticate my identity, and sign off on the movement of funds. Until I did that, the $100,000 was essentially trapped in a digital vault, suspended permanently between my father's desperate, arrogant demands and my absolute, unyielding refusal. I hovered my finger over the screen. There was a bright green button that said approve and a red button that said block. I did not hesitate for a single second. I pressed the red button. A system-generated message popped up, confirming that the transfer was now completely suspended pending manual verification. I added a custom note to the notification for my father to read on his end. The note simply said, "Transfer requires in-person signature release due to liability protocols. Please contact secondary account holder to arrange a meeting." I hit save. The trap was fully set and armed. The bait was dangling right in front of their faces, locked behind an impenetrable digital glass wall. They could see the $100,000. They could almost touch it, but they could not access a single penny of it until they played exactly by my rules. I set my phone back down on the glass desk, took a slow sip of my warm tea, and waited for the inevitable explosion. Miles away on the other side of town, Trent was already eagerly spending money he did not actually possess. Thanks to a fake social media account Derek had created specifically for monitoring purposes, I had a front-row seat to Trent's morning performance. I pulled up his public Instagram feed on my left monitor. He was broadcasting live to his modest, gullible following of fellow crypto bros and aspiring entrepreneurs. He was standing in the pristine showroom of a high-end European auto dealership in the downtown district. He was wearing dark designer sunglasses indoors, a tight, flashy suit, and holding the camera at a high angle to capture the sleek, aggressive lines of a charcoal gray sports car parked directly behind him. "We are making massive, unprecedented moves today," Trent bragged into the camera, his voice loud and obnoxiously confident, echoing off the showroom walls. "Just securing some new, high-yield assets." When you truly understand how to leverage decentralized liquidity, you do not have to wait for the traditional banking system to give you permission to live your absolute best life. You just take control. Major capital deployment happening before lunch. Stay tuned to the channel to see how we disrupt the luxury real estate market next. The camera panned slightly to reveal Paige standing nearby. She was holding an overpriced iced latte and aggressively flipping through a binder of premium fabric swatches. She was not even looking at the expensive cars. She was already mentally decorating the downtown condo, operating under the absolute, unshakable delusion that my life savings were successfully sitting in her boyfriend's digital wallet. She smiled for the camera, flashing a peace sign before complaining loudly to the car salesman about how terribly long wire transfers take to clear in this archaic, traditional economy. I watched the salesman in the background of the video. His professional smile was strained, his posture incredibly stiff. He clearly recognized a fraud when he saw one. He was politely but firmly asking Trent for proof of funds before tossing him the keys for a test drive. Trent waved the salesman off with a practiced, arrogant flick of his wrist, loudly promising that his private wealth manager was finalizing the transaction as they spoke. The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. They had not even signed the liability release contract yet. They had not even bothered to call me. They simply assumed that because my father commanded the bank to move the money, the entire universe would instantly bend to his will. Suddenly, on the live stream, Trent's phone chirped loudly. He pulled his device away from the camera angle to look at the screen. I watched as his arrogant smirk completely faltered. His jaw tightened, and the color drained slightly from his face. The wire had bounced back. The notification of my blocked transaction had just reached him. Trent abruptly muttered an excuse to his viewers, claiming he had a highly confidential investor call, and abruptly ended the broadcast. The screen on my monitor went completely dark. Less than 30 seconds later, my own phone began to vibrate violently against the glass surface of my desk. A barrage of text messages from Paige started flooding my screen. The calm, confident facade she had been projecting in the car dealership had completely evaporated into sheer panic. "Nora, what is going on?" Paige demanded in the first text. "Trent is at the dealership and his real estate broker is texting him non-stop about the condo. The wire is bouncing back. Dad said he authorized it this morning. Stop playing your bitter little games and release the hold right now." Another message arrived seconds later. "You are embarrassing us, Nora. The salesman is looking at Trent like he is a scammer. Just click approve. It literally takes 2 seconds. Do not ruin this massive opportunity for me just because you are jealous of my life." I did not reply. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, picking up my mug and taking another slow, soothing sip of my tea. I let the heavy silence stretch out, allowing their panic to marinate and intensify. They were currently standing in a high-end auto dealership, pretending to be young millionaires while relying entirely on the frozen savings of the pregnant sister they deeply despised. The profound humiliation they were feeling right now was entirely of their own making, and I was not going to lift a single finger to save them from it. My phone began to ring loudly. The caller ID flashed with my father's name. I let it ring. He called 3 times in rapid succession. When I did not answer, he left a furious voice message demanding that I fix the bank error immediately. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the end. I wanted them desperate. I wanted them completely blinded by their need for that money. I let them sweat for exactly 45 minutes. I wanted the embarrassment at the car dealership to fully set in. I wanted Trent to feel the burning eyes of the salesman judging his empty promises. I wanted Paige to feel the crushing anxiety of potentially losing her shiny new downtown condo because the funds were not clearing. I needed their desperation to completely override whatever tiny sliver of common sense they might have possessed. When my phone finally stopped buzzing with their frantic, angry calls, I opened the family group chat that contained my parents, Paige, and myself. I took a deep breath and drafted a carefully worded text message. I kept my response perfectly polite, entirely professional, and completely unyielding. It needed to sound like an annoying, mandatory banking requirement, not a personal vendetta. "Good morning, everyone," I typed, my fingers moving methodically across the screen. As I clearly mentioned last night in the kitchen, this transfer requires a formal, signed liability release. Because $100,000 is a massive withdrawal transferring out of a joint family asset into an unregistered, non-family member's offshore account, the bank flagged the forced transfer attempt as potential fraud. I cannot simply click a button to override a fraud alert. I am happy to release the hold and sign the authorization, but I will only do so in person after the liability release contract is physically signed by all parties. I am at my house. The paperwork is ready. Come over whenever you want the money. See you soon. I hit send. I did not include a single exclamation point. I offered absolutely zero apologies for the inconvenience. I simply restated the hard boundary they had tried to bulldoze right over. The response was almost instantaneous. Paige replied with a string of angry emojis, followed by a text that read, "You are deliberately trying to humiliate Trent in public. We are supposed to be wiring the money to the real estate broker by noon or we lose the condo." My mother, Sylvia, chimed in immediately after. "Nora, this is completely unacceptable and unbelievably petty. Your father is furious. We are not driving all the way out to your house in this terrible weather just to sign some paranoid piece of paper. Tell the bank you authorize it right now." I set the phone down and did not respond. I knew the exact cycle of their outrage. First, they would demand. Then, they would threaten. And finally, when they realized that all their screaming and posturing could not unlock the digital vault holding the $100,000, they would cave. 10 minutes later, the final message came through. It was from my father. His text was short, aggressive, and entirely predictable. We are leaving the dealership and picking up your mother. We will be at your house in 40 minutes. Have your laptop open and ready, Nora. I am not playing any more of your games. I smiled. The cold, calculated feeling in my chest expanded. They were furious. They were completely embarrassed. They were currently looking like complete fools in front of the very people they were desperately trying to impress. And because of that intense, overwhelming humiliation, they were going to rush straight to my house. They were going to storm through my front door, blinded by rage and entitlement, eager to sign whatever piece of paper I put in front of them just so they could get their hands on the cash and save face. I pushed my chair back and stood up, stretching my aching lower back. I walked over to my desk, picked up the sleek black leather folder containing the printed contract, and headed downstairs to the formal dining room. Derek was already there, wiping down the large wooden table. He looked up at me as I entered. "They're coming?" he asked, his voice calm but layered with anticipation. "They're on their way," I replied, placing the black folder precisely in the center of the dining table, right next to a set of expensive, heavy fountain pens. Derek nodded, walking over to stand beside me. He placed his laptop on the table, keeping the lid firmly closed. We stood there together in the quiet house, listening to the rain begin to patter against the large windows. They were rushing blindly toward their own destruction, entirely convinced they were arriving to conquer me. The invitation to hell had been sent, and my family had eagerly accepted. The heavy winter rainstorm that had been brewing all morning finally broke, lashing violently against the windows of our home. The sky turned a bruised, slate gray, plunging the afternoon into premature darkness. I stood perfectly still by the dining room table, smoothing my hand over the dark leather of the contract folder. The crunch of tires on wet gravel broke the silence of the neighborhood, followed by the aggressive slamming of 4 heavy car doors. I did not move toward the foyer immediately. I let them stand in the freezing rain for a few extra seconds. The doorbell did not just ring. It was held down, a long, continuous, abrasive buzz that perfectly communicated my father's furious entitlement. He was treating my front door exactly how he treated my personal boundaries. I walked to the entryway with a slow, deliberate stride. When I pulled the heavy oak door open, the cold, damp air rushed in, bringing with it the overwhelming scent of Sylvia's expensive floral perfume mixed with Trent's cheap, aggressive cologne. They stood on my covered porch, positioned in a tight, combative formation. Harrison loomed in the center, his chest puffed out and his shoulders squared, physically trying to dominate the space before he even stepped over the threshold. Trent flanked him, attempting to mirror my father's imposing posture, looking down his nose at me from behind designer sunglasses that he bizarrely refused to take off despite the dark storm. Sylvia and Paige stood just behind them, their arms crossed tightly against their chests, their faces twisted into identical masks of absolute, bitter irritation. "Are we going to stand out here in the freezing damp air, or are you going to let us inside to finish this ridiculous chore?" Harrison demanded, his baritone voice echoing off the brick walls of my porch. He did not say hello. He did not ask how my pregnancy was progressing. He simply issued a command, fully expecting the world to bow. I stepped back, pulling the door wide open. "You know the way to the dining room, Dad," I said smoothly. They marched past me, intentionally tracking wet, muddy footprints onto the pristine hardwood floor of my foyer. They did not bother to wipe their shoes on the mat. They moved as a single, hostile unit, bringing the deeply toxic atmosphere of their historic estate directly into my peaceful sanctuary. I closed the door, shutting out the howling storm, and followed them into the dining room. They refused to sit down at the table. They stood around the mahogany wood, leaning forward, resting their hands on the polished surface, intentionally trying to project superiority and deep impatience. From where I stood, they looked like towering figures of authority, radiating an overwhelming sense of temporary power. They truly believed they held all the cards because they had successfully bullied me into surrendering the money the night before. They thought my demand for paperwork was just the dying gasp of a defeated woman trying to save a shred of face. "Where's the laptop?" Paige snapped, tapping her long, freshly painted acrylic nails impatiently against the wood. Trent has been texting the real estate broker non-stop from the car. We are already 2 hours behind schedule. You need to log in and authorize the wire right now before they give the penthouse to a cash buyer. Derek stepped out from the shadows of the adjacent hallway, walking with total, terrifying composure. He moved to stand directly beside me at the head of the table. He rested his large hand flat on top of the closed aluminum casing of his laptop. The laptop stays closed until the paperwork is fully signed and witnessed, Derek stated. His voice carried the calm, resonant, absolute authority of a man who handled hostile corporate takeovers for a living. Good afternoon, Harrison. Sylvia. My father scowled, glaring venomously at Derek. We do not have time for this amateur legal theater, Derek. Nora is transferring family funds to her own sister. It is a private, internal family matter. We do not need to involve ridiculous liability waivers like we are negotiating a corporate merger. This is extremely insulting to me as the head of this family. Trent let out a loud, dramatic sigh, shifting his weight and checking his oversized, flashy watch. Look, Nora, I get it. You watch a few finance podcasts and suddenly you think you are Warren Buffett. But you are clogging up the pipeline. In the fast-paced world of digital assets, agility is everything. You are creating unnecessary friction for a simple capital transfer. Just open the computer and click the button so we can all move on. I met Trent's arrogant gaze with absolute glacial calm. When you actually manage your own wealth, Trent, you can skip whatever paperwork you like. But when you are desperate to use my money to buy your car and your condo, we do things exactly my way. Trent's jaw tightened visibly, his smug smirk faltering for a fraction of a second before he masked it with a dismissive, arrogant roll of his eyes. Sylvia stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Trent's arm while shooting me a glare so toxic it could have peeled the paint off the walls. Nora, you are being needlessly combative and hysterical, my mother scolded, her voice dripping with sugary condescension. We drove all the way out here in this terrible storm because you threw a hormonal temper tantrum about a simple banking error. We are indulging this silly need of yours to feel in control. Do not push your luck. Show us the paper so we can sign it and leave. I did not argue. I did not defend my hormones or my mental state. I simply reached out and flipped open the black leather folder resting in the center of the table. The stark white pages of the contract lay perfectly flat against the dark velvet lining. As they leaned forward to inspect the document, the power dynamic in the room instantly, visually shifted. I took a half step back, looking down at them as they huddled over the table. From this angle, viewing them eagerly scrutinizing the bait, their imposing stature completely vanished. They no longer looked like towering figures of authority. They looked exactly like what they were, greedy, desperate people rushing blindly toward a trap. This is a mutual separation of assets and liability release, I explained, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. The bank flagged the transaction because $100,000 is a massive, sudden withdrawal to an unregistered, non-family account. To release my hold on the transfer, I require absolute legal immunity from whatever you choose to do with these funds. Harrison pulled a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket and shoved them onto his face, quickly skimming the first page. It just says you are gifting the $100,000 to Paige and that we cannot hold you responsible for any taxes or losses related to the crypto exchange. That is the defensive clause, Derek clarified smoothly, keeping his hand resting firmly on the closed laptop. But there is a reciprocal condition for the release of these funds. I placed my index finger on the third page, tapping the specific paragraph Derek and I had meticulously crafted the night before. I looked directly into my father's eyes. Read it carefully, Dad, I commanded softly. I am making this incredibly simple and completely absolute. I give you the $100,000, but you waive all rights to any property, estate, tenancy, or assets owned by me or my corporate entities, forever. The dining room fell completely silent, except for the sound of rain lashing against the large windows. Harrison stared at the paragraph. Sylvia peered over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in annoyance. Paige did not even bother looking at the paper. She just stared at the closed laptop, practically vibrating with impatience. Assets owned by you or your LLC. Trent read aloud, letting out a sharp, barking laugh. He took off his sunglasses and shook his head, looking at me as if I were a delusional child playing dress-up. What assets, Nora? You have a mortgage on this basic suburban house and a standard retirement account. You do not have a real estate portfolio. You are asking us to waive our rights to a corporate empire that does not even exist. You are playing make-believe. Sylvia let out a long, exasperated sigh, dropping her designer purse onto the table. This is exactly what I mean, Harrison. She is obsessed with trying to sound more important than she actually is. Let her have her little moment of fake power so we can get Paige's money and go. I kept my expression completely neutral, masking the profound surge of triumph racing through my veins. They were doing exactly what Derek and I predicted. They were so blinded by their contempt for me that they completely dismissed the possibility that I possessed anything of real value. They could not fathom that the daughter they despised had amassed enough capital to quietly purchase the distressed debt of their own historic estate through Revenge Echo LLC. Are you going to sign it or not? I asked, my voice remaining perfectly detached. You take the cash today, but you acknowledge that from this moment forward, you have zero legal, equitable, or familial claim to anything with my name or my company's name on it. You get your money, I get my permanent peace of mind. Harrison snatched one of the heavy gold fountain pens from the table. He did not hesitate. He did not ask to consult his own attorney. He did not bother to reread the fine print detailing the forfeit of all equitable property claims. He was too desperate to prove he was the one dictating the pace of the room. If signing this paranoid piece of paper gets you out of my way, then I will sign it gladly, Harrison spat, uncapping the pen. You can keep your imaginary corporate assets, Nora. We do not want anything from you except the cash you have been hoarding. He bent over the table and pressed the pen to the paper. The scratch of the nib echoed loudly. He signed. Sylvia signed next, rolling her eyes. Paige scribbled her name blindly. I looked at the 3 signatures. I picked up a pen and signed my name. Derek signed as the witness. I closed the folder, pulled it toward my chest, and gave Derek a nod. He opened the laptop. I logged into the banking portal, hovered over the pending transaction, and clicked approve. A green check mark appeared. The funds are wired, I said. Trent let out a loud whoop of victory. Let us go, baby, he shouted, grabbing Paige's arm. The capital is moving. They turned and marched out of my house, slamming the front door behind them, completely unaware that they had just traded their multi-million-dollar historic estate for absolutely nothing. The 72 hours following the signing at my dining room table passed with an agonizing, silent tension. The storm outside eventually cleared, but the catastrophic storm I had unleashed upon my family was just gathering its true strength. The deadline had arrived. It was closing day for the luxury downtown penthouse. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Paige was standing in the opulent, marble-floored lobby of an upscale real estate brokerage in the financial district. She was dressed impeccably, wearing a bespoke white tailored suit that she had purchased entirely on credit, specifically meant to project the image of a young, wealthy mogul closing her first major real estate deal. But her perfectly contoured face was currently slick with a cold, terrified sweat. She held her phone gripped so tightly in her manicured hands that her knuckles were stark white. She hit dial for the 15th time in 10 minutes, pressing the glowing screen to her ear. It rang exactly once before clicking directly to a generic, automated voicemail message. Trent was not answering. Trent was not even in the building. Paige paced frantically back toward the large glass conference room where her high-end real estate broker, a polished woman in a sharp navy suit, sat tapping a gold pen against a thick stack of closing documents. The broker's professional, welcoming smile was rapidly beginning to crack around the edges, revealing the steep, icy irritation of a professional whose valuable time was being wasted. Is he parking the car, Paige? The broker asked, her tone clipped and overly polite. We have the notary waiting in the other room. The seller explicitly requires the final wire confirmation from your joint account before we can execute these documents. We are now 45 minutes past our scheduled appointment block. He is just dealing with terrible downtown traffic, Paige lied, her voice pitching upward a full octave, betraying her mounting panic. You know how unpredictable the financial district can get on a weekday. He sent me the login credentials for our joint crypto portfolio this morning. Let me just pull up the transfer code myself so we can keep things moving. Paige's hands were trembling violently as she opened the web browser on her phone. She navigated to the offshore cryptocurrency exchange Trent had been boasting about for months. The screen loaded, prompting her for the username and password he had confidently handed over on a sticky note just a few days prior. She typed the credentials, hitting the login button with a desperate, frantic tap of her thumb. The loading circle spun on the screen for a torturous 3 seconds. Then, the main dashboard materialized. Paige's breath caught in her throat, freezing her lungs completely. The sudden loss of equilibrium made her stumble slightly against the glass wall of the conference room. The large, bold numbers at the very top of the digital portfolio did not display the $100,000 my parents had surrendered. It did not show the massive, decentralized returns Trent had promised. The balance displayed on the screen was exactly $0.00. Paige blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if the physical motion could somehow rearrange the pixels on the screen. She swiped her thumb down forcefully to refresh the page. 0. She clicked frantically into the transaction history tab, her vision blurring heavily with hot, terrified tears. There it was. The incoming wire transfer from my bank account, the $100,000 arriving perfectly on schedule 3 days ago. And sitting directly above it, timestamped a mere 45 minutes after they had signed the liability release at my dining room table, was a massive outgoing transfer. The entire $100,000 had been instantly routed out of the joint account and into an anonymous, untraceable cold storage wallet. Trent had not invested it. He had not leveraged it for the luxury condo. He had swallowed it whole. No, Paige gasped, the word barely a whisper escaping her trembling lips. No. This is a glitch. The system is just glitching. She backed out of the banking app and opened Instagram. She navigated to the search bar, typing in Trent's username, desperate to see a recent post, to find some shred of evidence that he was still in the city, still her brilliant visionary boyfriend. But the search bar yielded absolutely nothing. The screen flashed a sterile gray message. User not found. He had not just deleted the app. He had scorched his entire digital footprint. Trent had packed his bags, secured the $100,000 from the gullible family of his desperate girlfriend, and vanished into thin air like a ghost. He was likely already on a flight out of the country, sipping champagne funded entirely by my parents' arrogant stupidity. Paige could not breathe. The walls of the luxury real estate office were rapidly closing in on her. She turned and ran out of the glass doors, bursting onto the bustling downtown street, completely ruined. Paige stumbled blindly down the crowded downtown sidewalk, completely ignoring the curious, judgmental stares of passing pedestrians. The pristine white tailored suit she had bought for her victorious closing day now looked like a cruel, pathetic joke as she leaned heavily against a brick building, gasping for air. A full-blown panic attack seized her lungs. She pulled her phone back up with shaking hands and hit my father's contact number. The phone rang twice before Harrison answered, his voice booming and incredibly cheerful, fully expecting to hear that the penthouse was officially theirs. "Well, if it is not the newest property owner in the family," Harrison announced loudly. "Tell me the keys are in your hands, sweetheart." "Dad," Paige wailed, her voice shattering completely into a loud, hysterical sob that echoed down the busy city street. "Dad, he is gone. Trent is gone." The jovial tone in Harrison's voice evaporated instantly, replaced by sharp, immediate confusion. "What are you talking about, Paige? Where did Trent go?" "He took the money," Paige screamed, gripping her hair, her pristine image entirely forgotten in the face of absolute financial ruin. "The crypto account is empty." It is at 0. He blocked my number. He deleted his social media. The $100,000 is gone. He stole all of it, and he left me here. There was a terrifying, dead silence on the other end of the line. The kind of profound silence that precedes a catastrophic implosion. My father, the man who had secretly mortgaged his historic estate and sacrificed his financial future to fund this exact moment, was currently standing in his grand foyer, processing the undeniable fact that he had just been robbed blind by a man he had proudly welcomed into his home. "Stay right there, Paige," Harrison finally ordered, his voice sounding hollow, completely stripped of its usual booming authority. "Do not talk to anyone. We are going to fix this." The call disconnected. Back at the historic estate, Harrison dropped his phone onto the antique console table. Sylvia emerged from the living room, holding a stack of invitations for the upcoming autumn charity gala. She took one look at her husband's ashen face and froze. "What is it?" Sylvia demanded. "Trent stole the money and ran," Harrison choked out, his chest heaving. "We have nothing." Sylvia let out a breathless gasp, dropping the invitations onto the floor. "But the gala!" she shrieked, her panic entirely focused on social humiliation. "I told everyone Paige was closing on $1 million penthouse today. We will be a laughingstock. You have to fix this, Harrison." "I will fix it," Harrison barked, his survival instincts kicking in. His entire identity was built on being the man who could buy his way out of any problem. "We cover the loss ourselves. We buy Paige a modest townhouse quietly and spin the narrative. We sell this estate." "Sell the estate?" Sylvia gasped. "It is our only lifeline," Harrison shouted, marching into his lavish home office. "We sell it fast to a private cash buyer. We pay off the secondary mortgage, take the remaining equity, and downsize." He snatched the desk phone and aggressively dialed the private number of his high-end real estate broker. When the line connected, Harrison forced his voice into its usual tone of arrogant authority. "I need to list the estate today. Quiet listing. Cash buyers only. I need a 30-day close." The broker sounded surprised but eager. "Certainly, Harrison. Let me just pull up the county registry to check the exact title status so we can expedite the paperwork." Harrison poured himself a heavy glass of whiskey with a shaking hand, waiting for the broker to pull the file. Sylvia stood in the doorway, twisting her diamond rings nervously. "Harrison," the broker finally said, his professional tone suddenly dropping into genuine, deep confusion. "There is a massive discrepancy here in the county records. The bank offloaded your distressed mortgage 6 months ago. The debt was purchased by a private entity, and a deed in lieu of foreclosure was legally executed. Harrison, you do not own this property. You have not owned it for half a year." The crystal glass slipped from Harrison's fingers, shattering against the mahogany desk. "What are you talking about?" Harrison roared. "I am the sole owner. Read me the name on that registry right now." "The owner on record is a limited liability company," the broker replied, his voice tight. "It is registered to Revenge Echo LLC." The name dropped into the room like a live grenade. Revenge Echo LLC. Harrison stared blankly, his mind failing to process the words. But a horrifying, strangled sound came from the doorway. Sylvia was clutching the door frame, her face completely drained of blood. She was staring at her own hands, remembering the heavy gold fountain pen she had held just 3 days ago. "Assets owned by Revenge Echo LLC," Sylvia whispered, her voice shaking violently. "That was the clause, Harrison. The liability release we signed at Nora's house. Nora is Revenge Echo LLC. She bought the debt. And we just signed away our only legal right to fight her eviction. We gave her the house." The towering ego of Harrison completely shattered. He had traded his multi-million-dollar legacy for a quick payout, and the payout was already gone. They were officially homeless, trespassing in a house owned by the daughter they had treated like garbage. The camera of my mind captured a steady, wide shot from inside the warm, brightly lit foyer of my home. Outside the large frosted glass panels of the front door, a violent winter rainstorm lashed against the porch. The contrast was absolute. Inside my walls, there was impenetrable control. Outside, a collapsing, terrifying world. The tranquility of the evening shattered with a sudden, explosive pounding against the heavy oak door. It was not the polite chime of the doorbell. It was the frantic, desperate hammering of fists. They were here. Derek walked up beside me, sliding his warm hand onto the small of my back. He looked at the rattling door with a mixture of deep disgust and protective fury. "I can send them away," Derek said, his voice a low rumble. "I can call the police and have them removed for trespassing." I placed my hand gently over his and shook my head. "No," I replied, keeping my breathing perfectly even. "They need to hear this directly from me. I need to look them in the eye when the final thread is completely cut." I stepped forward and unlocked the deadbolt, pulling the heavy door open. The freezing rain whipped across the covered porch, blowing in a damp, bitter chill. Harrison, Sylvia, and Paige stood huddled together, looking like survivors of a shipwreck rather than the elite society figures they desperately pretended to be. The polished facade of black excellence had literally washed down the storm drain. Paige's expensive white tailored suit was soaked and stained with city grime, her mascara running in dark, jagged streaks down her cheeks. Sylvia looked completely unhinged, her normally immaculate hair plastered flat against her skull, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Harrison stood in front, trying desperately to project authority, but his shoulders were hunched and his breathing was ragged. He looked exactly like a cornered, defeated animal. "Nora, let us in," Harrison barked immediately, trying to physically push past me into the warmth of the foyer. "We have a catastrophic family emergency to deal with right now." I did not move. I planted my feet firmly on the threshold, blocking his entry. My pregnant belly formed a physical barrier, a shield protecting the sanctuary of my home from their toxic chaos. Derek stepped up right behind me, his towering frame casting a dark shadow over my father. "You are not coming inside," Derek stated, his voice carrying the dangerous calm of a warning shot. "You can say whatever you came to say right there on the porch." Harrison's face flushed a deep crimson. "Trent took the money," he shouted over the sound of the rain. "That grifter drained the entire crypto account and fled. We need another $100,000 wired to Paige's account immediately to save the real estate deal and save our reputation. And Nora, I know about your little stunt with Revenge Echo LLC. You are going to sign the deed of the estate back into my name right now so I can leverage the equity and clean up this mess." They were hurling their insane demands through the pouring rain, fully expecting me to let them use my body and my future as a raft to save them from drowning in an ocean of their own making. I stepped out onto the covered porch, the cold air biting at my skin. In my right hand, pressed firmly against my chest, I carried the black leather folder containing the contract they had signed. I did not yell back. I did not mock Paige for her profound gullibility. I stood there and stared at them with absolute, glacial emptiness until their shouting slowly died down, leaving only the sound of the rain. Harrison's chest heaved as he ran out of breath. He finally realized that his volume held zero power here. He swallowed hard. "Nora," he whispered, his voice dropping to a hoarse plea. "Please. We are begging you." "You are not begging your daughter, Dad," I said, my voice slicing cleanly through the storm. "You are begging your landlord, and my patience expired a very long time ago." I opened the folder. I held up the contract, ensuring the bright porch light illuminated their signatures. 3 months ago, Revenge Echo legally purchased the distressed debt on your estate because you defaulted on a secret mortgage, I explained precisely. "I own the deed. If I had simply evicted you, you would have dragged me into court claiming equitable interest. But 3 days ago, you signed this. You voluntarily surrendered any and all equitable claims to my assets in exchange for cash. You traded your home for absolutely nothing." Harrison gasped, dropping to his knees on the wet concrete. Sylvia let out a piercing scream, turning on Paige and shaking her violently, sobbing that Paige had ruined them. I reached into the folder and pulled out a crisp white envelope. I handed it down to my father, who took it with a trembling hand. "That is your official 30-day notice to vacate the premises," I stated. You have exactly 30 days to pack up and leave my property. I stepped back inside, pulling the heavy door with me. Have a safe drive back, I said, and closed the door, locking them out in the freezing storm forever. The 30 days following that stormy night passed with the swift, merciless efficiency of a corporate liquidation. The massive, toxic facade of my family was completely and utterly dismantled. Without access to their heavily leveraged credit, and with the absolute reality of their financial ruin staring them in the face, my parents could not afford a luxury moving service. The community gossip had spread with devastating speed. Their elite country club friends and church associates conveniently found other routes to drive, ignoring my parents entirely. The untouchable image they had weaponized against me my entire life had completely evaporated. Harrison and Sylvia were forced to rent a cheap moving truck themselves. They packed whatever belongings they could fit and moved into a drab, cramped, two-bedroom apartment located right next to a noisy interstate highway. The space smelled faintly of old cooking grease and stale carpet cleaner. Sylvia, stripped of her designer clothes and her social standing, spent her days sitting on a faded, discount sofa, staring blankly at a television, entirely invisible to the wealthy world she once ruled. Paige's reality was even harsher. The bespoke white-tailored suit she wore on the day she thought she was buying a luxury penthouse was a distant, humiliating memory. She was now wearing a stiff, scratchy polyester uniform vest, working the grueling night shift as a cashier at a massive bulk grocery store. Her hands, the same hands that used to flaunt freshly painted acrylics while mocking my corporate career, were now dry and cracked from breaking down cardboard boxes. She was drowning in the $30,000 of credit card debt she had racked up funding Trent's illusion of wealth. There were no more European vacations. There was only the brutal, unforgiving reality of a minimum wage shift and a mountain of consequences she could no longer charm her way out of. But while they were drowning, I was securing the final, most important piece of my victory. Because Paige was entirely broke, heavily in debt, and living in a cramped apartment with our ruined parents, she was completely incapable of providing even the most basic necessities for her twin sons. I instructed Derek's corporate attorney to immediately pivot our focus from real estate asset management to family law. We filed an emergency petition for full legal guardianship of Mason and Finn. When the mediation date arrived, poverty acted as a brutal truth serum. Paige sat across from me at the polished conference table, looking completely hollowed out. When my lawyer presented the strict financial requirements for raising the boys, alongside the undeniable evidence of her past abandonment, Paige did not argue. She simply picked up the pen and signed the guardianship papers with a trembling hand, surrendering her children because she finally realized she had absolutely nothing left to offer them. Months later, the harsh, freezing rain of that final confrontation on the porch was replaced by brilliant, golden afternoon sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our home. I stood by the large window, watching my family. Derek was sitting on a plush, cream-colored rug, building a massive towering structure out of wooden blocks with Mason and Finn. The boys were laughing loudly, their faces lit up with a genuine, carefree joy they had never been allowed to express in my parents' rigid, museum-like household. They were not treated as burdens here. They were not props used to project a fake image of success. They were safe, protected, and completely cherished. The underlying anxiety they used to carry had entirely melted away. Cradled securely in my arms was my newborn daughter. She was sleeping soundly, wrapped in a soft green blanket, her tiny chest rising and falling with a perfect, steady rhythm. I looked down at her beautiful face, and I felt a fierce, overwhelming surge of protective pride. She will never know the suffocating weight of being the family disappointment. She will grow up knowing that her mother fought a ruthless, calculated war to ensure her environment was impenetrable and entirely pure. People often misunderstand the true concept of revenge. They think it requires screaming matches, dramatic public ruin, or actively seeking out ways to destroy the people who hurt you. But true retaliation is much quieter and infinitely more lethal than that. The sweetest revenge is about rendering toxic people completely irrelevant. I did not destroy my family. I simply handed them a fountain pen and allowed their own staggering arrogance to write their final chapter. I took the power they tried to steal from me, and I used it to legally purchase the very ground beneath their feet. I established my boundaries, reinforced them with ironclad legal precision, and built a fortress of peace they will never be allowed to enter. So, am I wrong for letting them blindly sign away their entire estate and destroy their own lives to protect my family, or should I have warned them before the legal trap completely snapped shut? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button for more satisfying stories from Revenge Flow. See you in the next video.